Standard economic theory views people as these rational decision makers, which is nice from an economic modeling standpoint because all sorts of nice mathematical proofs fall out of that assumption. But we know that reality is far from that. And so we've seen a new field arise of behavioral economics, which really focuses on exploring how people actually do behave and then the ramifications upon consumer choice and financial markets and whatnot. Can you explain a bit about behavioral economics and how it works and the benefits of that?
Sure. Behavioral economics is part of traditional economics. We're not trying to throw out the baby. We are improving on the traditional way of thinking about economic behavior. The traditional classical economic view is that people are perfectly rational and that they're also perfectly able to follow through on their good intentions. And behavioral economists psychologize that a bit and acknowledge that sometimes people are imperfectly rational, and that also, in many cases, we have good intentions and terrible follow-through. And that additional little psychological realism is our effort to make economics more realistic and more useful.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of your research focuses on the idea of self-control. That is that when we're trying to decide between taking an action now, it may have implications both in the immediate present as well as down the road. And we're not good at making that trade-off all the time in the way that a rational economic agent might. When I think about self-control, kind of the first thing that popped into my head was the famous Michel marshmallow test, where you would lock a child in the room and demand that they don't eat a marshmallow. And if they succeeded in that exercise of self-control, you'd give them additional marshmallows later on. So I know many of our viewers are probably familiar with that sort of example. Can you talk about some of the strategies some of those children might have used to help avoid that discipline, or how you see the ramifications of that more broadly?
So the marshmallow test works the following way. The experimenter tells the 5-year-old kid in the room, here's one treat. If you can wait until I come back, you can have 2 treats. And if you can't wait, ring this bell and I'll come back immediately and you can have the 1 treat. And many kids can't wait at all or can only wait for 15 or 20 seconds. Other kids wait the full 15 minutes until the experimenter comes back. Now, the kids often want to wait, but have an awfully hard time doing that. And they deploy some strategies that help them wait. Most importantly, taking this extremely tempting marshmallow and diverting their attention from it, or not thinking of it as a marshmallow, but instead thinking of it as a cloud. Or even if they're looking at it, managing to play some game in their heads that takes their focus, their mental focus, away from the marshmallow. So whether they literally cover it up with something, or whether they manage to distract themselves mentally, or whether they literally look away, these are the strategies that take this extremely tempting item and enable them to wait the 15 minutes and get the 2x return.
Okay, and as we grow up, we employ a lot of these same strategies. Your research documents a framework from which we can think about ways to help with self-control. And that's situational and cognitive on one hand, and self-employed versus other employed on the other. Can you walk us through that framework and describe those different metrics?
Yeah. So one of the interesting, I think, failings of human civilization is the principle that somehow we're going to make better choices by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and just deploying more willpower. If we somehow grit our teeth, we'll be able to have better willpower. And this paper is all about saying, nah, that doesn't work so well. There are other strategies that turn out to help us improve our ability to self-regulate. And those strategies can be put into a space that really kind of cuts along 2 different dimensions. One dimension is whether we're the one deploying the strategy, or society or others are deploying the strategy, so that's self-deployed or other-deployed. And the other dimension is whether the strategy is something that's sort of in our own heads, or whether the strategy is something that is situational. So let me give you a few examples. Mm-hmm. So an other-deployed strategy that is cognitive, and in your head strategy, would be a social norm. If I say, everyone reuses their hotel towels, then that's a way of conveying the message, hey, this is what we're all doing. Try to save water, reuse the towel. That would be a cognitive strategy that is deployed by others. Then there's a cognitive strategy that is self-deployed. Maybe I'm making a plan. Maybe I have a deadline and I tell myself a self-generated deadline. you try to get this work done by tonight at 10, and then you can relax and maybe watch something on Netflix. So I create an internal plan, an internal action goal, and then I act on that. That would be a cognitive strategy that is self-deployed. Then there's situational mechanisms that can be either other deployed or self-deployed. So an other deployed strategy might be an active choice. Maybe the hotel says, hey, we want everyone to decide actively whether they want to reuse their towel or not reuse their towel. And we're going to kind of ask you to actively make one decision or the other. There is no default. That would be a other deployed strategy that is situational. A situational strategy that is self-deployed is something like commitment. So suppose I'm trying to actually get something done tonight by 10 p.m. A stronger strategy than just telling myself, David, do it by 10, is to actually promise my co-author that I'll send it to her by 10 o'clock at night and make that promise ironclad. And so I'm committing using this external party to sort of punish me or to create credibility for my promise. And that commitment can be a very powerful way of getting myself to do the thing that I'm trying to do. So we talk about all these different strategies in the paper. This is a paper co-written with Angela Duckworth and Katie Milkman, both at the University of Pennsylvania. And we talk about all these strategies, and we emphasize that none of them involve having more willpower. They all involve taking the limited willpower that we have and enabling it to go further.
Okay, great, thanks. So let's relate this to a couple examples in the financial markets. And one area that I think we as a society have spent a tremendous amount of resources on is saving for retirement. And there's a lot of literature that documents that many people are nowhere near saving the amount that they need in order to provide for a safe, secure retirement. What are, this could be some of the big successes that we've had in terms of self-control over the years. What are some of the strategies we've seen employed that have helped people get closer to that goal?
So the one strategy that's kind of not necessarily so obvious, but it's very much part of the ecosystem of savings is compulsory savings, which is happening in the Social Security system. So we essentially mandate that everyone in America that gets a paycheck puts some of it away for retirement. So that's a paternalistic, other deployed, situational strategy. But we're also using less strict strategies like defaults, where we default people into a 401k, and we say if you don't like it, you can opt out. So that would be a second pillar on top of the mandatory Social Security saving. We're also using a lot of cognitive strategies, where we try to talk people into saving. We tell them how important it is. It's in the newspaper all the time. We tell people that it's critical. We tell them how many other people are saving. And so we're deploying all of these cognitive strategies to also help people increase their savings. Turns out those cognitive strategies work a little bit. They don't really have a lot of bite. The strategies that are working best tend to be the situational strategies, either the hard paternalism, like Social Security, or the softer paternalism in the form of a default or an active choice, where we essentially tell people, we're going to put you into a savings system, and if you don't like it, opt out, or we want you to choose whether you want to be in a savings system or not. Those strategies tend to have more bite than simply trying to talk people into saving.
So you're saying even after we're all grown up, it's still hard to get people to save their marshmallows for later.
Exactly.
But there are ways.
Though I will say it is true that as you get older and older, self-control problems seem to loom smaller and smaller. Yeah. So if you're 5 years old, it's hopeless. If you're 15, you're on your way. If you're 25, you're making real progress. And then it just sort of slowly gets better after that, all the way to the end.
Yeah, there's hope for us. Okay, so one of the other areas that relates to issues of self-control has to do with the downturns in the markets. And I think there's this idea people have sometimes that they can try and time the markets, which has throughout history proven very difficult to do. But mostly when the markets enter into a downturn, people tend to have this sense of panic, and they tend to want to pull out and sell, even though they realize perhaps it's not such a good idea. But in the short run, they're enabling themselves to avoid this negative feeling that they have about being invested in the markets during this downturn. So could you explore perhaps some strategies people could develop ahead of time to plan for when these inevitable downturns occur? How can they respond more appropriately and try and avoid that lack of self-control over those impulses?
Yeah. So individual investors, as you point out, have a very hard time timing the market. And to the extent their actions are correlated with the market, they tend to sell at the wrong times and buy at the wrong times. So individual investors should not be trying to time the market in their own trades. Now, they sort of know that, and they know that they should resist these impulses that wash over them during these major market movements. And that's a self-control problem. They understand that market timing is hard. They understand that individual investors tend to do it terribly. And yet, when the moment comes, they tend to panic like everyone else. So the message is, resist that impulse, sit on your hands. During your cool moments, develop the strategy of being passive and not trying to time the market. And then when the panic occurs and when everyone else is rushing for the exits, that's the moment to remind yourself of the strategy you developed, the cognitive strategy you developed, the plan you made during calm moments to not overreact when the market is melting down.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what we've learned today is that behavioral economics is really studying the ways that people actually behave, and that there's useful information we can get from that to help people make better decisions in the longer run. Around issues of self-control, those can broadly be either situational strategies, which helps us change our environment to have the appearance of more self-control or make decisions easier for us, or cognitive strategies, which are more of the educational variety. It seems like the situational ones tend to have more bite and more effect by and large, although planning and cognitive strategies can also be useful.
That's exactly right. Changing the environment has proven to be much more effective than trying to talk people into changing their behavior.
Thank you.
Thank you.